Accommodation. So where do you live? Where do you reside? What kind of accommodation do you have? What kind of housing are you looking for? Those are most of the questions that realtors will ask. What kind of accommodation you're looking for? What kind of a house? What kind of a home you want? Accommodation. House. What's the difference? Accommodation is something, it's simple. Accommodation is something that is temporal. It's where you be staying temporarily. Whereas a home, a house, is much more permanent or long-term. So it's about temporal, it's about long-term. Accommodation. Temporal. It's temporal, for a brief stay, for a certain period of time. House, it's long-term. Accommodation, let's look at different facilities that offer accommodation. I have stipulated here a couple of them, and we're going to look at them. Let's start off with a lodge. Let's start off with a lodge. A lodge is, it's a fancy way of saying the gatesman's house, let's say, for example. A lodge is usually a small home or a small place that is being built close to the gate. It's a small home or a small habitation in the main house, but it's out like in the compound, like in the gate, but it's close, it's been built next to the gate. It's usually used by either caretakers, maintenance people, the gate man. That is what they call a lodge. But sometimes a lodge too, often, like in America, a lodge is like a residential place, which is almost like a home. That, let's say it's been built like with the kitchen and all that, which is much more comfortable. And so that is a lodge. But the basic understanding, it was created mostly for gate men, for the maintenance people of a family home, for caretakers. That is a lodge. A guest house, by its name, is a house that is external to the main house for guests. Remember our lesson on family and relationship? That is a guest house. It's a house that is external or is out of the main home, but then it is built for guests. So it's really a home that has all the amenities of a home, but it's been built, is meant for guests that come in and they don't want to infringe into the family. Maybe they have activities to do and they come in late or what have you, and they don't really want to bump into the main family. So by respect, they offer them the guest house. Just like we have the guest room in a house. Like the guest room, that is a spare room in a house for guests that come, so visitors that come. It's the same logic as a guest house. And then bed and breakfast. You usually hear bed and breakfast in America. It's a new concept that is out now. That is, or sometimes you hear B&B. B&B is bed and breakfast. It's basically that. It's a bed, and then they offer you breakfast. It's as simple as that. It's an extension of the idea of a guest room. It's the only difference is with a guest, with a bed and breakfast, you're being paid for the services. Like you have to pay to be offered that bed, and in the payment, breakfast is included. So anything after that, like lunch or dinner, you pay extra, or you handle it out scarce. That's the difference with a guest room. A guest room, you come in, you're a guest, you're a visitor, everything is being offered for free. But bed and breakfast, you're being paid. It's someone that has his or her home and offers you a room Maybe they have a spare room that they want to use, maybe make extra cash, and then they use that room, and then you pay for it, and in the payment, breakfast only is included. That's why it's called a bed and breakfast, B&B. And then you have a cabin. A cabin is usually just a small, simple house, period. It's a small, simple, most oftentimes made out of wood. But another definition of a cabin is a small section or a small bedroom, let's say, or a small room in either a ship or in the boat. That's a cabin. That's a small resting area, a private resting area in a ship or a boat, or it's a small, simple house, usually out of wood. That's a cabin. Of course, we have hostel and dormitory. Hostel is what you hear with the British. They say a lot, hostel, my hostel, my hostel. The Americans would say dormitory, dormitory, or short for the dorm. What is a dormitory or a dorm? It's usually an inexpensive facility. Inexpensive, why? It's an inexpensive facility that is used by common people, that it's being shared by a lot of people. That is a dormitory or hostel. That means it's a room that you share with other people, and then you have a common area, like a common bath and all that common area, like the kitchen or so, or the refectory if you're in a boarding school. But then the room, the sleeping area, is being shared by 2 or more people. That is a dorm. For example, those that are in a boarding school, those are in a university that go to the dorm, like the school hostel. Sometimes you have to share the same room. You have 2 separate beds in the same room, and then you have a common area like the bathroom or the kitchen or the refectory. So that's the difference between a hostel. So they're very inexpensive, because then you split the area. You know, if something was going to cost 1,000 and then you have 4, then at the end it costs 25. So it's inexpensive. And then you have the hotel. Hotel is something that is much more fancier. It's much more expensive and has all the amenities, all the facilities that you may think of: Wi-Fi, a pool, a sauna, a gym. You know, they're more expensive, but they have all the amenities. And so that is a hotel. That's an accommodation, because you're there for a certain period of time. An extension of hotel is a motel. Usually mo comes from the word a motorist. You know, people with the moto, it was usually created with that in mind. The motorists are the ones that actually created something like a motel, because they realized that they were going all around, you know, for so long, and they didn't have a place that they could just park their bikes and just hop in. And so that is why the word mo for motorcycles came through, like a motel. A motel is less expensive. It's a building that is usually by the roadside because of the motors that usually parked. And so you'll find most motels by the roadside. It was most constructed to be built by the roadside, and it has less amenities like the hotels. You know, it has very few. It's basically just come in, rest. It doesn't have most of the fancy things that we look for in a hotel. That's a motel. And then the campsite, so people that go on camps, they call them a campsite. When you go on excursions, you go to the camps, different camps, to the, you know, the forest, whatever you have. Those are campsites that you use tents. Usually you use tents there, you know, tents. And then a cottage, you see, a cottage. A cottage are usually small vacation houses. Cottages are small vacation homes. Cottage are small vacation homes or houses in rural areas. Rural areas. Rural mostly means in the suburbs, in the villages. That's what they call cottages. Usually small, usually comfortable, very quiet, very private. But in the interior, you don't see cottages in the city. Not as, you know, you don't see them a lot. Most often they're meant for like retirement, or they're meant for just to take a break from the busy, noisy city life. And so then they go to the rural areas, to the suburbs, to the villages. Those are what they call cottages. And then resorts are basically the top of the top. Resorts are mostly higher than hotels. Resorts are what mostly families go for. It's mostly for families, especially families. You have the resorts that are really fancier, probably more expensive, but then they have much more facilities for kids. That's what they call a resort. I mean, they include, so it's really family-like. So they include kids in most of their amenities. They can have a slide, they can have jumping, they can have a lot of things for kids, like trampoline. There's more resorts, so they're much more fancier resorts. So these are some of the accommodations that we can think of. And I've told you, accommodations are usually things that are temporal. I'm the